To start out, we want to plot out the most important part of our scene. And for this scene, it's going to be this central tree. I'm drawing 2 lines with my ink pen. I'm using a 0-1 in this lesson. And as always, you want to do this pretty lightly. You don't have to draw thick, dark lines. You can kind of dot it out almost. Drawing these lines up the middle of our page. And having it flare out towards the bottom on the right hand side. That's going to be where we're going to add the roots. Now, because trees are a little bit tricky, and the branches especially, we'll take a little bit more time to add the branches later on. But for now, I'm just curving out to the left and right to give the suggestion that there are going to be branches to come. We'll return to that later on in this lesson. However, for now, we're going to return to the idea of adding perspective and that lovely fence to our drawing. We're going to start doing that by adding some vertical fence posts. These are going to start to the left of our tree and get slightly farther apart and longer as they come down. Now, you can see I'm drawing them at about a 15-degree angle downwards. But experiment, do this with pencil if it makes you more comfortable. These get longer and longer and farther apart as they come down towards us. We can go back and now add some weight and thickness to these fence posts. Now, I like the fact that we aren't using a ruler here because I think the wobbliness and the wiggly lines really add some character to these fence posts and to our final drawing. If you want to use a ruler, that's totally fine as well. However, I think this gives us a nice little bit of whimsy and a bit of lyrical kind of organic lines to go with. Now we want to start connecting our fence. And so to do that, we're going to draw some lines here. Connecting. You want these to be fairly straight, but again, don't worry too much about making them uniform. First, we'll add maybe 2 lines, and you'll notice that the ones on the bottom are slightly more angled. Now you can see that the last post here is a little bit more of an angle, almost making it look like the fence is curving and then curves a little bit sharper as it gets towards us. That is totally fine, and I think, again, it adds a little bit more of your own style if the fence is a little wobbly or a little bit uneven. We can now thicken these fence posts. You'll see that my hand is a little shaky. I have had 3 cups of coffee today, so that might be why. But I'm making these a little bit thicker, adding some weight to the fence posts. And again, I'm not really worried that the lines don't all connect and that they are a little bit wobbly and imprecise. In fact, fading them out towards the back is an important step here. You'll notice how the boards closest to us are thicker. We can now add maybe some foliage and some vegetation around the base of our tree. So obscuring the left-hand side of the tree, I'm adding some very lyrical light lines here. And perhaps adding some leaves on the outside of these lines too. Making it kind of look like there's a bush to the left, that this tree is not well kept or well groomed, but instead it's a nice wild tree. We'll go back over this later on in this lesson, but we have the outline of this foliage here, and I'm going to start adding some grass shapes here as we go back in the landscape. Now remember, these should get a little bit larger and more precise as they get closest to us, because as things get farther away, they get smaller, they get more imperceptible, harder to see. This is also where we can start adding some texture and some life to the bottom of our fence. You'll go to any fence or farm in the country and you'll notice that along the bottom of it, often there's some foliage and vegetation that can be a little bit unkempt. That's what we want to capture here. You'll see the lovely thing about pen drawing is how the small and imprecise lines that we've added so far are actually giving us the perception of a grassy field. Our eyes kind of fill in the blanks, and that's what I love about art in general, but especially pen drawing. We can kind of add some details and our eyes fill in the rest. Now, before we add further details to the grass or the fence or the landscape around us, let's spend some time drawing the tree. Now, trees are hard. It requires a lot of observation and practice to draw trees well because it's difficult to capture these natural shapes with pen. For our purposes, we're just drawing the bottom little bit of this tree here with some thicker branches that kind of spread out. A couple rules to keep in mind is that the branches should get thinner as they go up the tree, and the sides should mirror each other. So you'll see how these branches get thinner, and the angles mirror each other on the branches that I'm drawing. However, we want to add some foliage now, and this is a lot of fun to do. I want to start by kind of sketching out the circle of brush around us here. And again, doing this really lightly means that you can adjust or, add more or to even take away some of the tree as needed. It might be hard to see on camera, but I'm creating really short and fast loops with my pen, trying to hopefully give the impression of leaves that are scattering away from us, the viewer, getting smaller as they get farther away. We want to kind of make sure we have some parts where the sky is visible between or around the leaves, because you'll notice when you look at trees in the wild, often those areas you can kind of see through, or the leaves get a little sparser or lighter as we get to the edge of the tree. It's the middle of the tree that's thickest and darkest. Now, if we can imagine the sun kind of shining in from the left-hand side of this drawing, that means that the bottom and the right-hand side of the tree are going to be in shadow. And we can start by adding some hatching to create those shadows. When I hatch, I usually grip the pen a little bit farther back, and I'm creating fast, up and down lines here. Don't be too hard on yourself if you're coloring outside of the lines. Don't worry too much about perfection. This is all about learning here, so I'd say even if your tree is not looking the way you want it to right yet, keep going. You can see that I'm carrying the hatching up almost, a quarter of the way up into the foliage here, because from our vantage point, some of the underside of the tree would be visible. That's also going to be where the tree is the darkest, because we often perceive shadows as being the darkest right where they connect with sunlight. You can see that I'm adding some further lines similar to how I drew the outside of the tree. And these are going to be kind of the outside of the foliage here. The areas I'm shading in darkest are on the underside of the tree. And when I shade in some of the branches, it's clear that they're on the underside of the tree as well, so they would be in shadow. We can start to do this with the right-hand side of the tree as well, adding some shading and adding some outlines that we shade right next to. This kind of helps give the impression of the tree being, three-dimensional, having some billowing branches and leaves that kind of come outward here. want to make sure that we leave some parts completely white as well to make it look like there is some sun kind of peeking through, or that the leaves have some gaps between them, or we can see behind the tree as well. Often I find beginner artists, especially people who are unused to drawing with pen, won't vary their shading areas enough. It'll be all dark and all light. It's important to have a kind of a broad range of shading in the art you're doing, especially when you're drawing with pen. I'd encourage you to try that out here. See if you can add different levels of hatching. See if you can kind of vary the amount of shading that you're putting into your drawing. The branches that are in shadow, we're going to color in with our ink pens. That one down there, we'll make it very, very dark. This process is really never done. I mean, you could add as much detail as you want to this tree. I'd say it still is crying out for more. Some nice outlines here kind of give the impression of a little bit more foliage on the left-hand side. Adding a little bit of darkness here to kind of give the idea of there being some holes in the foliage. So we're seeing kind of into the darkness of the tree here. But in general, this left-hand side is going to stay pretty light. Now, if we were closer, we would draw individual leaves. That'd be a pain in the butt. But for now, we're just keeping with the outline, adding some areas of shadow, but keeping the majority of the left side of the tree light. This also means that we need to add some shading and texture to the tree trunk itself. My favorite, probably one of my favorite things to draw is tree bark texture. Here's how I do it. So we're going to add some very loose, long up and down lines here along the tree, following the tree bark itself. It's okay if these lines connect. And then we're going to add that hatching to the right-hand side of the tree. We can carry this hatching down here because if you see that the sun's coming from this side, that means that actually a lot of the tree is going to be in shadow. And we can add some areas of darker lines here, kind of where the small little crags and imperfections in the tree trunk would catch the light and cast shadow. Now we can carry the shadows down here to the bush that we drew to make it look like the underside is in shadow here. Add some more volume to the vegetation we've drawn. One really effective way to add some realism to your scene too is adding some of the vegetation, flowers, and anything in the shadow of the tree itself. You'll see how these shadows on the right-hand side here kind of give some three-dimensionality to the tree. Make it look like it's drawn in perspective because the sun is shining, hitting those and casting them in shadow. But that also means we need to draw the shadow of the tree. So if the sun's coming from this side, we're going to extend the tree outwards with some hatching. We'll shade this entire little bit of fence here. And we'll add some more volume around here. Now, shadows are pretty hard to do, especially when you are drawing an object like a tree with really billowing, uneven sides. So this shadow is not by no means perfect here. Just want to make sure it roughly covers the shape of the tree. It extends out on the opposite side of the sun. We can then kind of accent or exaggerate this one post that's closest to us because it is in sun. I think we're going to add some more shading, more vegetation up here too, right in front of us. I think it's often fun to kind of break up the monotony of a long, bigger texture. Like the grass here as well. So I'm going to add a rock and add some shading to the right hand side of that rock. The question is, what is behind this fence? And you could leave the drawing as is, even add some darker shading if you like, but it could be interesting to add a little bit of background. Often, perspectives and landscapes are most interesting when they have a background, a midground, and a foreground. And for this drawing, it can be really whatever we want. I think maybe I'll draw in a little curving, sloping field. I find this kind of contrasting the lines here can be kind of interesting. Making it appear like this field slopes upwards. I'm going to add in some mountains. And again, keeping with my style of drawing really lightly, jagged lines. Now these are far away, and as such, we don't want to shade them in too darkly. We don't want to shade them in with too much detail. I'm just shading in the rough shapes here. You'll notice when I'm drawing these big areas of hatching and shading, I'm starting with my pen on the page, and as I'm dragging, I'm kind of getting lighter. I'm kind of loosening up or applying less pressure to my pen. When you're drawing a scene like this, it can be really useful to return to the things that you've drawn. See if you've added enough shading, enough detail, if there's areas that you can draw on more or add more detail to. And I mean, as I said earlier, things like a tree or vegetation or even flowers or anything you draw, you can add kind of limitless customization, limitless detail to. But I'd invite you to return to your own drawing. Are there areas you want to add more detail? Are there things you want to explore more? I think I can add more vegetation as this drawing goes back here. I can also shade in parts of this tree a little bit more darkly. The key is to have fun with it. Don't worry about making your drawing look perfect or even good. We're practicing new techniques. We're practicing drawing confidently and having an inquisitive mind about how you're creating landscapes with pen. So I'd encourage you to not worry really about how your drawing looks, but more think about what you were thinking while you were drawing it, how you enjoyed the process, and areas in your drawing practice that you want to improve or think more about. As always, you can find detailed instructional videos of mine on Skillshare or on this YouTube channel. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you want to draw next, or what you want me to draw along with you. This tree, I'm thinking, is looking like it's in pretty darn good shape. You can add a little bit more shading, and then I think we're going to call it done. Thanks for drawing along with me, and I hope you keep sketching.